And independent of all of our representations, the images that we may have, or the descriptions that we may make of our lives, of what we are, etc. All of these descriptions, representations are, in a way, artifice. It's in a way, it's an ornamentation, a description. It's not the thing itself. If we say, oh, there's me or there's no me, these are elaborations, representations, ideas. In short, this is not really knowing. This is just maintaining an idea, representation. Concretely, we have this experience. We perceive through our senses, we see, we have this experience that is undeniable, independent of all the descriptions that we can give or make. This is like this comes from this. This experience, every moment of experience is followed by another moment. It's followed by another moment. It has different qualities. Sometimes this experience, sometimes we perceive through our senses. Sometimes our senses aren't active. There are different phases, waking moments, sleeping moments, dreaming moments. There is a continuity of our experience, of our mind. And this continuity, this quality of mind is this clarity, this capacity to know. And it's very different from physical reality that we observe, the descriptions that we give for physical reality. It doesn't have this quality. Physical reality, in the end, is indeed reality for us as something that we experience. It can't be separated from our experience. In a certain way, the physicalist idea is saying the object of my experience is ontologically more true than the thing. In other words, what I observe through my senses exists substantially, whereas my experience of the thing is epiphenomenal. It's a derived product. It's not a reality. This is a concept that we have. When we look at our experience, truly, concretely, there's no means for us to know physical reality without perceiving it. And perception is linked with our mind, which thus allows for physical reality to be perceived. And this makes physical reality inseparable from our perception. We cannot know it independently from our consciousness, from our mind. We tend to separate these two, subject and object, as two completely separate, distinct objects. The object is something substantial and separate. But in fact, really, we've never perceived the object itself. We only perceive what our consciousness gives us to see, what our mind gives us to see. And in this way, it's inseparable. So saying it's this object that produces, in short, mind, that's not understanding our experience. That's attributing or reifying something in our experience and giving it an entity apart, and then saying that this thing produces our experience. That's what we call confusion, ignorance. It's an interpretation, a biased interpretation of what we are living. What we live, what we experience, the experience of outer phenomena is inseparable from the mind that experiences it. From there, we can see that mind is not an epiphenomena, or in other words, a derived product of physical matter. We can't know that. We cannot establish that. So, what allows for the emergence of this experience? Well, it's the preceding instant. In other words, in our experience, we see that every moment is followed by another moment, and this continues. And therefore, when death occurs, mind won't stop. The continuum of mind will continue. And so now, presently, mind in its duality and its confusion, there's this perception that we are not master of our mind. It's constantly agitated. It doesn't truly know. We don't truly know reality as it is. There is obscuration, ignorance that is present. And so long as this is present, then the conditions for suffering are present. Have conditioned birth, having it as we experience it now, and for this to occur again, this is possible. Maybe this can help you a bit. But it's a point that it's very important to reflect on yourself. And it's important in practice, in terms of commitment, that you have confidence in this subject. The more confidence that you have in causality, the more you will be diligent in practice. For example, Master Milarepa, who you see here, during his lifetime, he became a Buddha. He attained enlightenment. And what led him to attain enlightenment was his confidence in his understanding of causality. He says it himself in his biography that I invite you all to read and read over and over again, as well as in his 100,000 songs. His understanding of the suffering inherent to conditioned existence. Milarepa is really the example of someone who has completely renounced all of the 8 preoccupations of the world, completely, to an extraordinary degree. At a certain point, he had nothing to eat. And he preferred to continue meditating and practicing at the risk of his life than to go and beg for food and run the risk of becoming distracted from his meditation. He had great resolve. And where did this resolve come from? It came from his understanding of causality, that all of our outer preoccupations are, in the end, futile, a waste of effort. That at a certain point, everything we have worked to achieve will lose. The finality of life is death. When the moment of death arrives, the moment of death is uncertain. It can arrive at any moment. All the possessions that we may have accumulated, all of the wealth, belongings, etc., in the end, they will all be lost. Everything is exhausted, everything breaks. All relationships, all meetings, all unions inevitably end in separation. Everything that we have been able to build will come apart. This is the impermanent nature of reality. In short, all of this is impermanent and constantly changes because it is fundamentally insubstantial. All of the phenomena that we perceive, we think that they exist as we perceive them. That the blue that I see exists outside of me as objective blue somewhere, and that I'm just a receiver that sees it correctly. But this is not the case. None of these things exist as I see them. My perception is something constructed. It's just an illusion. Because I don't see this illusion, because I let myself be carried away by this illusion, because I'm constantly pursuing this illusion, I'm only reinforcing this illusion. Here, the goal of practice, of wisdom, is completely escaping from this illusion. I think that Milarepa didn't take any pleasure in being hungry, being cold. At a certain point, he had meditated for so many years that all of his clothes had nearly disintegrated. He took the bags that he used for his provisions and he turned them into clothes. He was constantly meditating. There's also a story of some hunters that came. He asked them for provision. No, they asked him for provisions, and he only had nettles. And so he offered them some nettles. And they said, okay, but do you have some salt to go with the nettles? He said, no, add some more nettles for salt. And they said, well, do you have some butter to add? And he said, no, you can add some nettles instead of butter. And they said, okay, but do you have some sampa, some grilled barley to go with your nettles? And he said, no, you can add more nettles instead of sampa. And it's not because he enjoyed this. Simply, he saw that everything was simply illusion, that the important thing was for mind not to get distracted, not to stray. And so, due to his diligence, in his lifetime, within his lifetime, he attained enlightenment. He was free of all difficulties. Then he said it himself, the greatest bliss possible. But this demands, even if we don't have the same diligence that Milarepa had, it requires us to apply ourselves as much as possible to practice, and especially that we understand causality correctly. So if I may say, there are two approaches to Dharma study. There's simply studying the Dharma out of curiosity. We do many things today just to distract ourselves. We live in perpetual distraction. If the Dharma becomes our distraction, we listen to teachings, but it won't be very useful for you. Listening to the Dharma, as I said yesterday again and again, it's not just listening to the Dharma. Read, research. There are many masters, many scholars. Listen to them. Try to really understand perfectly the meaning of the Dharma, understanding it in a way that you can apply it as much as possible, to be able to put into practice what we can, and to see that this is really a rare opportunity. For example, in the preliminary instructions that we talk about often, we talk about the importance of recognizing the preciousness of our current condition, the fact that we were able to encounter the Dharma and develop some certain confidence in the Dharma. This is really rare. And the conditions for this to happen are difficult to bring about. Inner conditions, and then the ability to encounter the Dharma, and then furthermore develop some confidence in the Dharma. You have a certain perception or intuition concerning the importance, the relevance of the Dharma. This is extremely rare and precious. And when we have this, it's important to consecrate our time, our life to practice. All other pursuits are, in short, a waste of time, destined to failure. Because, as we saw, it's only interacting with illusion, something that is by nature impermanent and that will, in the end, only be a source of disappointment. So this precious condition is not simply the fact of being a human being or being in contact with the Dharma on its own. It is, especially above all, the confidence that we experience in regards to the Dharma, and particularly confidence in terms of the teaching on causality. This confidence, the Tibetan term is dhipa in Tibetan, shraddha in Sanskrit. Sometimes it's translated as faith or devotion. But in English, the terms faith especially, there is a lot of connotations related to adhering to something or belief, whereas in Buddhist literature, shraddha, dhipa, is associated with the notion of discernment, the idea of discerning, clearly seeing, not necessarily understanding fully, but to have authentic knowledge, an authentic glimpse of the depth and the validity of the Dharma, and develop confidence in this, to develop understanding of this, It starts first with understanding causality and confidence in relation to causality. It's extremely important. Now, we're going to look at the term prajna. In short, here, the question is, what is the prajnaparamita? This is the term that we see associated with the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma, which occurred near Rajgriha, which was earlier the capital of Magadha. And in a place just outside of Rajgriha, known as Vulture's Peak. Taku Kumpuri, which literally means the mountain of the aggregation of vultures. Because when we're here, there's a lot of rocks, and vultures are assembled there. We call it the assembly of vultures. Anyway, today we tend to call it Vulture's Peak. It's not like a very, very high mountain, but it's an important place. A place where the Buddha lived and taught, notably. The turning of the wheel concerning what is free of characteristics. Why is this cycle of teaching called this? Because what is taught here is ultimate reality, that is an ineffable reality beyond words, beyond thought, beyond any expression. In this teaching, we also showed that all phenomena, from physical phenomena up to the omniscience of a Buddha, are entirely free of characteristics, intrinsic characteristics. Or we can also say free of substantial independent nature. None of these things have any kind of this nature. They are all emptiness. This is designated as being the teaching of prajnaparamita, in short. This term, prajna, that we see in the term prajnaparamita, is made up of the term prajna and then paramita. The term prajna is made up of the terms jna, which means to know, and pra, which means superior or superior higher knowledge or deeper knowledge, veritable. So, prajna. This term, we should not confuse this term with a kind of passive knowledge, knowing a certain number of facts. This term, prajna, is associated with analyzing and investigating, if you will, actively investigating in order to realize and know how phenomena appear and what their true nature is. This term is perhaps more associated or better associated with the English term intelligence. in its original meaning in terms of faculty of knowing. Prajna designates the capacity to clearly discern. Here, the definition given of prajna is that which discerns the characteristics, the general characteristics, that which discerns the general and specific characteristics of phenomena. This term, prajna, includes different varieties. We can distinguish various forms of prajna or intelligence, this capacity for understanding. We can have capacity for understanding that is greater, lesser, more precise, less precise. There's also ordinary prajna of the world. Then there's also prajna that is beyond the world. That is a higher level, if I may. And when we distinguish this capacity for understanding, directly refers to the Buddhist path. We also earlier, yesterday, I believe, referred to briefly the three vehicles: the Shravaka vehicle, the Pratyekya Buddha vehicle, and the Bodhisattva vehicle. The term vehicle, a little aside here, these vehicles, as I mentioned yesterday, are not the result of separations, schisms in Buddhism. They reflect different teachings that the Buddha gave according to the audience that he was addressing. So for a more general audience, the Shravaka teachings, the listener teachings were given. For a slightly more advanced audience of higher intelligence, the Buddha gave teachings to the solitary Buddhas, the Pratyeka Buddhas. And then for those of supreme intelligence, even greater capacity, ability, then the Buddha gave the teachings of the Great Vehicle. And so here we can see these three vehicles. They're not in any way contrary to each other. They're just different degrees of deepening the teaching, the Buddha's teaching. They correspond with the intelligence or the capacity for understanding of the different disciples of the Buddha. Sometimes, for example, we might have an idea of preference. The Great Vehicle is superior, it's better. I want to commit to the Great Vehicle. We might engage in this kind of discrimination, some do. But in fact, it's necessary not to discriminate in this way on the basis of ordinary discrimination, attachment, pride, etc., of course, we can discern different degrees of depth or superiority of certain teachings, but it's not by denigrating or discrimination in the pejorative sense of the term that we should undertake these kinds of distinctions. Also, all of these vehicles are valid. The best vehicle for a practitioner is the one that they are able to put into practice. In other words, there's no need to criticize or distinguish. We need to try to understand all of the teachings of the three vehicles if we have access to them. If we don't have access to them, try to understand the teachings of the vehicle that we are lucky enough to have access to, try to put them into practice. And what we can understand, what we can practice then will be truly beneficial. If we try to put into practice something that we don't understand, then we won't be able to truly benefit from it. So coming back now to prajna, we saw that there is a kind of prajna that is not ordinary, can be called extraordinary or beyond the world. That is in relation to the Buddhist path. We can also talk about the prajna of the Shravaka vehicle and prajna of the Pratyekya Buddha vehicle. We can also distinguish prajna, extraordinary prajna, very unique and specific of the Bodhisattva path. When we talk about prajna beyond the world, the wisdom of the Shravaka and Pratyekya Buddha, then we can understand this as the authentic understanding of the Four Noble Truths, particularly the absence of substantiality of a person, the individual, non-self, and also understanding of the 12 aspects of dependent arising. Then the prajna of the great vehicle is, in addition to understanding of the absence of substance of a person, also understanding the absence of substance of all phenomena, in terms of what we spoke of earlier, from matter and forms all the way up to omniscience, are free of birth and empty of inherent substantial nature. And again, concerning prajna in the great vehicle, we can also divide this into prajna arising from listening and studying the teachings, and prajna, which is the fruit of reflection, and prajna that is the fruit of contemplative exercise or meditation. Concerning the first type of prajna coming from listening, this concerns having correctly listened to the teachings in order to understand the meaning and the words. So here we could say there's a learned knowledge. We learn what is emptiness. We don't know. It's something that we've learned, but we haven't yet been able to verify it for ourselves. The next step is to reflect on the the premise of the teaching, to test it, you could say, with our own analysis and understanding, to arrive at directly seeing the validity of what is given in the teachings. That is the prajna, that is the fruit of reflection. That's a prajna that is not only learned, but that is really acquired, in the sense that we ourselves have seen that all phenomena are emptiness, free of substance. It's not something that someone has simply told me and that I repeat, but through reflection, I really see it. This understanding serves as a basis for what we call bhavana in Sanskrit, or gom in Tibetan, which is commonly translated by the term meditation. Bhavana means to make it be, or gom also has this sense of cultivating or familiarization. The discernment that we have, with the discernment that we have acquired, then we'll familiarize ourselves with it and actualize it. Through this exercise, this knowledge becomes truly authentic and direct. In the Prajnaparamita Sutra, in 700 stanzas, it is said, a son or daughter of the lineage who wishes to realize that all phenomena, in other words, from matter up to omniscience, are free of birth, needs to exercise the prajnaparamita in the manner of non-observation. The term here, prajna, associated with the term paramita. So paramita, the term here, there are two kinds of explanations that are given in terms of the etymology. One derives the term paramita from paramaktiva, excellence. In this sense, this concerns wisdom, knowledge, intelligence, understanding that is the greatest possible, that is excellent, insurpassable. There is no greater or superior discernment or knowledge to this one. So this is one meaning of paramita. Another etymology of paramita is, and this is the one from the Tibetan translation, par du chinpa. This is wisdom that has gone to the other shore. So this is a quality of transcendence that's referenced here. That transcends all confusion. In particular, the idea here of transcendent is that this wisdom wisdom prajna, the most superior there is. It transcends in the sense that it leads to what is beyond both samsara and nirvana. It goes beyond, it goes to the other shore. This is a pretty specific idea. It doesn't only mean that we acquire freedom from conditioned existence and that we access perpetual calm of nirvana, but it goes beyond nirvana. And here we speak of unlocalized enlightenment of the great vehicle. It's enlightenment that transcends samsara, of course, but it's also discernment that transcends nirvana, beyond suffering. It is, in this way, enlightenment that is non-localized, full and perfect enlightenment, according to the Mahayana, it is the enlightenment that, according to the Mahayana, the Buddha accomplished. Now it's 11:07. I've gone beyond my time. Please excuse me for these 8 minutes. Let's take a break and we'll come back to this subject at 11:40. You get your 30 minutes break.
Ye tamche ziba nye toni nye pe ranam pamche che ga na che balap tu bai si be cho le ro wa sho